Welcome, everyone, to a very special edition of Flow at Work. My name is Emma Thomas, and I'm joined by Maria Castellez from Platformation. And we are joined by distinguished thought leaders in the commercial real estate space from Avison Young. Today, we will be discussing trends, challenges, and predictions in commercial office real estate as companies seek to keep up in a real-world version of Who Moved My Cheese? I'd like to take a moment to introduce our guests. With over 30 years' experience as an executive leader in commercial real estate, we have Principal and President of America's Professional Services, Sheila Botting. She has been helping companies design creative visions for a thriving workplace strategy practice for over 10 years. I'm pleased to introduce Principal and Senior Director of U.S. Workplace Consulting, Michelle Osborne. And lastly, there would be no trends without the data powering them. We are joined by Insights analysts Ann McWhirter and Misha Smith. All right, ladies, let's dive in. So a burning question that Maria and I are hearing a lot is, how are companies behaving right now post-COVID in terms of demand for office space?
So if you think about it, you think about return to office is the big buzzword right now. Michelle and I, of course, think it's not necessarily return to office. That was done like 2 years ago, 3 years ago. But we actually track, the foot traffic downtown, 28 North American cities, and we see how busy the downtowns are. And when you look at that, and of course, Ann and Misha are very actively involved in that practice. When you look at that, downtowns from March 2020 to today are about 50% back to where they once were. And it's not 50% during the work days, it's nights and weekends, because people are going to restaurants, they're on public transit, they're going to meetings, they're not necessarily visiting the office. And so we're seeing a giant void in what does the office look like? Why would we bother going there? What is the opportunity? And what is really the role and definition of the office? And that's what our clients are wrestling with today. In this new hybrid work style and technology empowering our people, it's changed the game entirely. And that's really the conversation that we're into every day.
Mm-hmm. I love how you phrase that too, the role of the office. I think that's something that people probably wouldn't have even questioned 10, 20 years ago. So what are organizations doing with the office space that is still sitting empty due to the remote work trend?
So can I go one question before that one? Because there's so much going before that. So then you think about, okay, who wants to go to the office and why would they want to go? Right? So what does that look like? And that's really what we're solving for. So as we run all of our surveys across North America and globally, 85% of the employees want some kind of a hybrid work style. So then therefore, the flip side of that is companies are saying, do I need all my office space? What does that look like? And I'm going to let Michelle talk about the actual behaviors inside the office in a minute, but do I need all my office space? So as leases are coming up, and typical leases, especially in North America, are 10-year leases, as leases are coming up, the majority of clients in the first evolution of this new trend are saying, we can optimize our footprint. And by optimizing the footprint, if they're a growing organization, it might be the same amount of space. If they're the same size organization, they'll probably reduce their space. And that could be a reduction of anywhere from 10 to 40%. Some of our clients have said, forget it, we don't need any space at all. We're just going to let the lease run out and not take any space. So again, one size does not fit all, but everybody is looking to what is the role of the office? How does that play into my employee value proposition? And what does the future look like? So when I put on my asset manager hat and I'm seeing vacancies creep up, either direct vacancies or sublet space, in some markets they're approaching up to 30%, and others they're moving from 7, which is a balanced market, up to 10 or 15%. It's a big conversation across North America in terms of what that looks like. So maybe I'll turn it over to Michelle, because she's deep into it with what specific companies are doing in various cities across the US.
Yeah, and I think, your point of, companies are always in different points of their company life. Many of them are still growing and taking new space, or as you said, leveraging hybrid work to be able to continue to grow in their existing space. And we have clients that are asking us to help with that. How do you show us how we can grow in our current space by leveraging some of our new flexible work? So some of it is really just growing in place. Some who might be earlier or middle in their lease terms may look at that extra space and say, how can we reallocate this space to something that's more meaningful for our business? And so that gets back to that conversation of, well, what is the purpose of your office? And if you have extra space in that office, what would you use it for? That you didn't have maybe before, didn't have the luxury of thinking about before because you were building one seat for every person and that kind of took up your entire space. So I think the idea of reallocating that space to a higher and better use for your business is also something that folks are considering, depending on, again, where they are maybe in that lease process. Of course, we're seeing some that are contracting, but trying to do that in a really smart way and figure out what kind of new spaces they need to do to create as they contract. And again, it sort of depends on how they work and what what people are coming into the office for. Are they coming in as a more private space, or are they coming in more to connect or to do brainstorming or to do things that just physically you can't do at home? Sometimes even just working with equipment that they need. Are companies that are product development, things like that, maybe need to be a little more hands-on. So it is a wide variety. It does sort of depend on where they are in the cycle and whether they're in a growth mode or maybe in a more steady state with their headcount.
Michelle, I have a question for you. Are your clients asking you guys how to facilitate the flexible and hybrid work models, or is that not a part of the conversation yet?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. A lot of clients are still in the spot where they have one seat for every person and they need to make that leap. And what does that look like? How does technology enable that? How does it help them move into that kind of a process? And what are the ways that it can be done? There's not really just one way of doing that. People have seat reservations. They have mixtures of people with assigned and flexible seats. They have neighborhoods. They have free address where teams sort of decide amongst themselves how they're going to work with their number of seats. So there's lots of different approaches, and we help them through that process of figuring out what might work for them, and ultimately, what does that mean in terms of their footprint?
Okay, and then do you guys have in mind a future state of what this ratio of desk to employee looks like, or is that still up in the air and everybody's guessing? 1-to-1, and what is it going to be?
Yeah, you know what? Definitely not guessing. We have, especially at Avison Young, we take a very nuanced approach to looking at this with our clients. Most clients have reached a steady state in terms of coming back into the office. So we can really measure and look. And one size or one ratio for all teams and for an entire company is maybe a good way to start off at a high level when you're estimating, but as you really start to look at the footprints of the office and what really needs to be in there, we have to break this down in a little more detail, understanding that most companies have folks who fall into three categories. Some folks are in every day, either because they need to be or they want to be. And then almost all companies have some level of 100% remote employees. And what kinds of seats might you need for them who are in very occasionally? And then you have the folks who are hybrid, who are coming into work maybe 3 days a week or 2 days a week, and doing the math to say, you've got your folks who are in all the time, the people who are remote most of the time, how often are people in the middle, and really calculating out specifically how many seats you would need for those folks. So we're really starting to drill down at that at a much more detailed level, as opposed to just a single ratio. We're seeing it even more because clients are moving to, a lot of them are moving towards models where they let individual teams make the decision about how they're going to come in and when and with what frequency. So now that math is not just done at a company level, but it's done at a department level and at a team level. And of course, you have to build in some flexibility because these are long for your lease tenants. This has to last them for a while. So there's also some structured vacancy, growth projections, and those kind of things that all factor into it. So it got a lot more complicated in the last 3 years in terms of how we set up the number of seats in a place, and that's really where the new math is coming in.
Well, speaking of math, where are people getting the data to see what space is being used? They must not be going around counting, seats and heads. So how are people getting this data to share with you that helps you guys arrive at the decision of what space is needed? How are people tracking who's coming in and what's being used, or are they not?
Oh, you want me to take this? I can take this, Sheila, or if anyone else wants to take it. But this is a case of card readers are still the most common way that folks are tracking who's coming in. They look at the card readers for the building, for their suite, and they tie that together with their HR data, and you can really look at which teams are coming in and which days and with what frequency. So that is still the most common way for people to track. Folks that have reservation software where people are reserving desk as they come in are obviously have another level of understanding of not only who's coming in, but also where are they going, right, when they're in the space. Tie that together with your conference room data, and yet you've got another level of what people are doing when they're inside, once they get past the card reader at the door, right? What are they doing inside of their space? So people with that software installed are able to do those kinds of things. And then the third level is sensors, which we do not see very commonly, but they are certainly out there, and people are using them either for short-term studies or some for more long-term studies. And that's where you really have some understanding of presence or a heat map of your space all day long. So not only do you know how many people are where, but when they were there, how long they stayed there and moved on to other space. So that's really the deepest level. But I would say most folks are at level 1, and they're looking at that card reader data.
I'd love to do the yes and to that. So in the early days before the pandemic, we would actually send people around floor plans, and you do a tick and bop on some kind of an app and say who's sitting down, who's meeting in their office, what are they doing? Are they on their physical phone, which we don't have anymore, or are they collaborating? So we would do the physical, observation of people. And what we found before the pandemic is the average seat was empty 50% of the time. It didn't matter if we were downtown in a major North American city or we're in some distant rural suburban campus. The average seat was empty 50%. So there were already organizations well in place to reduce their footprint because the way we work has changed. We're no longer processing paper from the left to the right of our desk in our cubicle. We're saying we're engaging. We're on Teams and Zoom calls. We can interact with people anywhere we like. When you think about where we all come from at the beginning of this call, we can work collaboratively in any way. So because of that, the world of work was changing. The worker was changing, whether that was onshore, offshore, nearshore, whatever. And then now the workplace is catching up to that whole transformation in the fourth industrial revolution, you could argue. So now in the physical workplace, in that catch-up world, we're saying, how do our Lego pieces all fit together? What does that look like? So the yes and to Michelle's comment is one of the things that we've just done at Avison Young is in our laptops, we've got a new software system so that when I come into the office, it senses me in the office. So we can actually monitor how many people are in the office and what are they doing in the office. So we're actually getting out in front with our own footprint and moving to hot desking types of environments, or hoteling, as Michelle tells me to say, so that hoteling kind of environment toward the optimization opportunity, which is really what we're looking toward. When you think about the corporate finance side of organizations where we spend a lot of time, they're all under pressure to reduce their costs in this kind of a market. And if you're looking out at a floor plate that's 50% empty, you're saying there's a pretty good window to where I can save money here. And that's what we're really into a conversation with most of our clients. And you're balancing that off against user experience, right? Your employee experience. What is your value proposition in the war for talent? And how do you lure people back into the office? And how can you coach them in through pizza days or lunch and learns or whatever it is that you have to offer so that it becomes a total immersive place to be? And so many organizations are moving right along that spectrum.
What you said about the employee experience is something I just want to ask you a little more about. When people come to you guys for new space or a renewal of space, or they want to optimize their space, how much of a factor is the employee experience in conversations now versus last year?
It's everything. So if you like, this is where I can share some eye candy with you. If you're happy for me to do that, to give you a little bit of the work that Michelle and I have been working on.
This is just really interesting because a lot of people say let's talk numbers. It's hard to quantify the whole value of the employee experience, but it just keeps coming back to the experience. So I'm very interested to hear what you guys are seeing.
So it's all about the employee experience, right? And each of our clients is very different. And so the whole conversation is one size does not fit all. So what one financial organization may want is very different than, say, a law firm or than a technology firm. So it's about designing that experience, which is what Michelle was speaking about. What we do know is that dull is no longer the way of going. Having these cube farms that people sit in to process paper isn't what the experience is all about. So what we're really seeing with our clients in the post-pandemic world is at its core, it's all about inspiring your employees with innovation to drive their productivity. It's providing some kind of a flexibility and choice as to where and how they're to work. Whether, again, I mentioned earlier, whether we're having a virtual experience or an in-office physical experience, and that physical experience has as many different dimensions to it. We pay attention to, of course, ESG, health and wellness. Some of our clients actually have, fitness in their facilities so that their employees can engage right across their whole, overall desires and requirements. Technology, just like I've spazzed out on the technology just now, but really important to have technology that's seamless for the virtual and physical experience. And of course, really paying close attention to diversity and inclusion. And this isn't just culture and gender diversity. This is also about technical diversity. Everybody coming from different backgrounds to be able to add the best in their team environment. What we've seen in, this is an example in Manhattan during to April 2020, that there's a flight to quality. So the top 25% of the Manhattan office market captured 75% of the activity. So what we're seeing, we talk about lease expires. Well, now because of the finances available in the market, tenants are able to upscale their overall quality of office space. And so that's a really big trend on the flight to quality. When they actually secure their leases, having this town hall kind of experience, so you're engaged in part of the culture of that workplace, whatever that looks like. So you've seen all kinds of things like, coffee, barista bars, recreation. I use this as a public administration kind of example, but a town hall, whatever that is for that business. And then when we look at the physical workplace, really important that we move from these traditional cube farms with the private offices around the outside and the cube stations on the inside to 20 different work environments, which is a really important consideration. We call it the dynamic workplace, so people can move around how they need to work based on their specific requirements. And then, of course, moving from a very rigid, hierarchical, siloed kind of environment where you're sitting at your desk from 9 to 5 and I have to see you and what you do, to a flexible campus that's networked, collaborative, and agile. And so then the space has many kit parts, so to speak. And this is the piece that Michelle was speaking about with respect to how do you combine both the individual spaces with the collaborative spaces with the social spaces. So many different elements in terms of what that looks like. And as you can see, I've got many slides here that we could consider for the eye candy. So great conversation points to get into and how we bring the pieces together.
And I think as we're talking with clients, and advising them on where to focus, right? Because there's not unlimited budget on projects to go after everything. I think we really ask them, one, to invest in talking to their folks. Let's do the surveys, let's do the focus groups, and let's also have the vision sessions with senior leaders and with middle managers who are on the ground trying to manage these distributed workforces, and really talk to them and find out what's working and not working. And it really is different. It's not one size fits all. Everybody doesn't need, the same amount of amenity space or the same kinds of collaboration spaces. And it's really amazing what we learn when we stop talking and start listening and really understand from employees. And most senior leaders really want to take that kind of approach. They want to make sure that they're getting everyone involved, and hearing, as Sheila said, from this variety of voices within their organization. So there is a lot of energy and a lot of projects that start out in that way. Let's go talk to the folks in our organization at all levels. And that really helps us start to decide where to put that energy. The other thing that we often talk about too is don't jump straight to amenities. Don't forget about hyper functional spaces. Your office has to work. If you come in and you can't get anything printed and you're having all kinds of technology problems and it takes 5 minutes to connect to your virtual call and then you can't hear the person and you're always mute, right? All it makes you do is go, you know what? I'm having a better experience at home and I'm gonna take that experience. So don't jump over the part where we make the office super functional for the people who are in it to get the work done. The amenities also have to be there. The bar has been raised for everyone in terms of what needs to be in their office in terms of amenities, food and beverage, wellness, places to rest, places to rejuvenate. All those are almost table stakes these days. You need to have those kind of places in your space in order to attract really the best talent. So don't forget about functional, and then, certainly make sure that you're doing what you need to do around amenities.
Very interesting points about don't skip the basics in terms of functionality. You're right. I'm sure everybody's going to be very quick to be like, you know what, my setup is working better at home. I have my printer behind me, my Wi-Fi is on. So that's a very interesting point.
I use that analogy a lot of when people are coming into the office every day, they've got one question on the way in: is this worth the cost of my commute? What am I missing by being in this commute? And all the way home, they're thinking, was this a better experience than what I had at home? And they're doing it every day. When they come in, and every day you have to remake your case for the workplace, and make sure that it's a really functional experience worth people's time to come into the office, and that they are able to do things as well or better than they are at home.
Very interesting. Never thought of it like that.
The yes and to that is we've done all kinds of research in the human experience within the workplace, to Michelle's point, and those companies that invest in that experience and make sure they address both the functional and the experiential elements can see a 4 times increase in their profitability. And so what you learn about the workplace, it's the power of the mix of people, culture, and ideas that can allow people to flourish. And that's really what we're solving for, is overall business functionality, profitability, and engagement for people.
Wow, 4 times.
Wow. What company doesn't want that?
Exactly. I want some of that. But I would like to ask you guys, so for the level ones that are still using card readers to track or who's coming in or who's going to go in on what day, how how are they informing X or Y teams or X or Y employee base that they can come in on a certain day, and then the remainder of people that they can come in the other days, so that there's not uh, too many people for as many desks as there are in space? How are people communicating that plan or scheduling to employees for those companies that aren't using a software yet?
I would say we'll call it the assigned days methodology of flexible working is really not as common as you
Okay.
might imagine. That people aren't getting assigned, you come in on Mondays and Tuesdays and you come in on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Now, it doesn't mean that teams aren't deciding amongst themselves, let's all come in on Thursday because we've got something we want to accomplish together in person. And that's part of the figuring out the number of seats, is really looking at some of the trends of how often people are coming in and building enough for peak, but not so many that it feels like a sea of empty workstations. And often that is around designing things that can be really multi-purpose. So something that works as a private space for someone when there are more individuals in the office, and can work as collaborative space when there are fewer people in the office, without it feeling dead. I mean, that's the comment I heard the most probably in the last year, is that the office feels dead. It doesn't feel vibrant. It doesn't feel alive. What can we do to reactivate the space? And those are, some of the things that people are looking at. And so we really don't want people to overbuild in terms of number of seats, but really be smarter about how they're using that square feet so that it's really functional.
And I think it's all about change management, right? I think it's all about people. You're used to your private seat with all of my stuff all around me. Now suddenly I've got to pack it up and move somewhere else. And, the gamification that people play around technology is a big one. I may book out something for 2 weeks and then maybe show up just on Thursdays. And so that creates a whole other level of frustration. So we're working with our clients to make sure that the right blend of technology works with how our teams and users come together. And that's really, I think, what everybody's trying to solve for, because that particular piece is not perfect and it's requiring tremendous change management. To Michelle's point earlier, if there's sensors in the office, if somebody books out an office and doesn't show up, the sensor goes off and we're good to go. That's one scenario. But if I'm on a Sunday trying to book my favorite place and somebody else has it booked out and the whole office is booked, and yet then when I arrive on Monday, nobody's there, you know that the gamification's taken place with the offices. So that's a piece that I think the entire industry is trying to solve for. And what some of our clients have done is they've only allowed booking for some spaces, and the other spaces are plunk and play. You can go and use it whenever you want to, and that seems to be a nice mix. But that's not, again, one size does not fit all. Every company has their own version of how they're going to use the technology and how it works. The other part is to make sure that the employee experience is seamless between the virtual, as we're all doing right now, through to being in the office. And how can you make sure that that is, consistent for everybody in a totally inclusive culture? How can you make sure that everybody's bringing their whole selves to work? And so that's another part that technology is working to make sure that we all feel the same.
Okay.
And I think there is a lot to learn from the early adopters of hoteling and seat sharing technologies. I mean, a lot of professional services companies were already doing this and have been doing this for 10 or 15 years. And I think there is a lot of lessons learned in terms of their implementation. Their business case is a little bit different than maybe some of the newer folks who are dipping their toe into that pool. But I certainly don't want to forget about all the things we've learned related to rolling that out to professional services firms probably 15 years ago, and making sure that we continue to advance it forward, to Sheila's point, with all of the right process steps, understanding the roles and responsibilities within the organization that are needed when you have a new piece of software like this, and then the change management at the end user piece as well. How do you keep people educated and make them understand what the benefit is to them for having this kind of system and this kind of flexibility in their working?
Okay, so I'm gonna ask you guys one more question, and then I'm going to be respectful. But there is this author who wrote a book. I think it's called like Strategy in Place forever ago. Maybe she was a Harvard grad. I can't remember, but it was essentially saying that how you use and set up and offer your office space either is going to enable or hinder your organizational objectives, your bottom line. It was either this how you use the space or how you offer the space to your workforce would either enable your business strategy or hinder it. Have you guys heard that? And do you have clients that kind of subscribe to that mindset that what they do and how they set up their space and the kind of work model they offer is going to accelerate their business goals or set them back at all?
Absolutely. So it goes back to what I just said, right? Those organizations that invest in their workplace can see a 4 times increase in profitability. And in the war for talent, it's all about that. So then the question is the adoption. What companies move at what pace toward that adoption, and who's willing to make the investment that's required? So to Michelle's point, many of the large consulting firms and certainly the financial institutions tend to be the thought leaders in that space, and then everybody follows in the market. Seems to be where it goes. Of course, the tech companies too. So I forgot the tech companies, and then others will follow. But in the war for talent, that's everything that people are striving for.
Okay.
I will say yes, and to that, I do believe there are a lot of companies who know and can look forward and go, I see my workplace as a differentiator, right? This is something that makes me different and can advance me. I think actually there are fewer companies that believe it hurts them. I think most companies think it keeps them neutral, or they can see ahead and think that it is helping them. And I think this is unfortunate that companies maybe don't understand that not investing in their workplace will also have some detrimental effects. And that isn't talked about as much, and is not a point of view that most companies think about. They don't consider it a negative. It's more of a neutral or a positive. And I think that is something that we have to work with and sort of help folks understand why an investment in their workplace, a smart investment based on their business purpose and based on the purpose of their office, really makes sense.
Wow. Random question for you guys. Are you seeing any particular industries or sectors succeeding or lagging in the flexible work model? Is finance and tech leading the way, and manufacturing and food and beverage or whatever it may be, retail, lagging? Is there any unique trends or differences between sectors right now in terms of flexible work model and getting that right?
I'll start. So I think before the pandemic, it was all about the tech companies, the consulting firms, and the financial institutions. And again, I'll pick the big banks as that category because they were all racing in this war for talent and the digital nomads. That's what they wanted to attract. Then the pandemic took place and everybody else is catching up at different paces. That said, if you're in a manufacturing or a workplace where you actually physically need to be at your desk as part of your role description, that's a different conversation than those that can be more digitally enabled and move around in different places. So I would bifurcate it along those lines. I don't know, Michelle, you probably have some additional thoughts on that too.
Yeah, I think maybe the other bifurcation I might make is really large organizations versus mid-size and maybe even smaller organizations. Large organizations tend to have the infrastructure and the staff and the bandwidth to take a big project like bringing in software and changing really their entire seating and the way that they do that at more of a local or global standpoint. Mid-sized companies don't always have that, and they need usually more consultants to help them get through that process. And I'm not sure we are exactly serving the smaller market yet. And I'm talking, 10,000, square feet or less. What do they really need? They are working hybrid as well. It's just on a lot smaller scale. And I think that there's more work to be done in terms of adoption there. Most of them are just keeping their one-to-one because right now that's kind of the easiest thing to do.
I think this has been fantastic. And thank you so much for bringing all of us together. Sheila, Michelle, thank you so very much for your insights. We will absolutely be in touch. And I look forward to seeing where these trends go.